Alexander Hill. I am the Assistant Director and International Programs Manager for the Energy, Growth, and Security Program at the International Tax and Investment Center. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we have been doing work on Central Asia in one form or another since 1993. Our work currently mostly focuses on geoeconomics in the region. So this is a mix of the export, import difficulties, energy possibilities, and various obstacles that foreign direct investment encounters when working in the region. This event is being hosted in conjunction with the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute. Central Asia-Caucasus Institute is part of the Foreign Policy Research Council. Laura Linderman is here in the audience with us. She did a lot of the logistical work behind this event, so thank you very much, Laura. And Dr. Fred Starr is also ably representing them. So a couple of logistical notes about today's event. So all remarks will be on the record. This event will be uploaded after the event is done onto the EGS at ITIC YouTube channel, where you can distribute the event afterwards. The event has online functions for question and answer. So if for whatever reason you do not want to ask a question in person, there are barcodes at the tables that you should see. You can scan those, and you should be taken to a Google question form where you can ask the question. Or if you're courageous, you can simply ask it in person. So I'll very briefly introduce all of our speakers, and then we'll get started with main attraction. So Frederick Starr joined the American Foreign Policy Council as a distinguished fellow for Eurasia in January 2017. He serves as the founding chairman of the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute, and Starr is also a research professor at Johns Hopkins University SAIS in Washington and head of the advisory council at the Institute for Security and Development Policy in Stockholm. Frederick Starr is truly a legend in the Central Asian field. He has written numerous books on the regions, almost so many I don't think I could go through the list today. But I highly recommend you, if you are interested in Central Asia or if this event sparks some interest, please check out his many works. Eric Rudenschold is the Senior Fellow for Caspian Affairs and served under Presidents Trump and Biden as National Security Council Director for Central Asia. He has extensive experience on a range of foreign policy issues, including democracy and human rights, international affairs and development, and counterterrorism. His areas of regional expertise include the Caucasus and Central Asia, Eurasia and Europe, and multilateral organizations. Rudenschold is currently with the Caspian Policy Center, where he does many good works, and you should also check out their work. This speaker, Mehdi Prayavi, is currently not at the event yet, but we did receive confirmation that he should arrive shortly, so I will introduce him when he arrives in more detail. But he is the chairman of the International Data Center Authority, and he provides guidance to the International Data Center Authority affairs and the industry as a whole in managing their foreign relations and their investments. And last but certainly penultimate, Ambassador Alan Mustard has capped 38 years of diplomatic service as the U.S. Ambassador to Turkmenistan from January 2015 to June 2019. He's a fluent Russian speaker, and Ambassador Mustard spent roughly a third of his career as an American diplomat either in the former Soviet Union or in Washington dealing with the region, including 2 tours of duty totaling over 7 years at the American Embassy in Moscow. Other postings include Vienna, where he covered the countries of Central Europe, Istanbul, Mexico City, and New Delhi, where he also covered India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. And I am Wesley Alexander Hill. As I said, I'm the Assistant Director and Lead Analyst for Energy, Growth, and Security here at ITIC. I focus a lot on Chinese investment in Central Asia, how that impacts the region, what that means for American companies moving into the region, and how that impacts wider geopolitical, geoeconomic trends such as the Belt and Road Initiative. So, without further ado, I will turn it. Oh, I'm very sorry. I appear to be missing the biography information for Cecilia Niang. I will let her introduce herself in more detail, but she is a manager for the World Bank She covers Central Asia and Eurasia, where she manages a wide range of programs, hundreds of billions of dollars worth. And her recent work includes helping to shepherd through and standardize and enable the hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. Uzbek and U.S. Kazakh bilateral arrangements that were announced at the sidelines of the C5+1. So, without further ado, I will turn it over to the one of our main attractions, Dr. Frederick Starr.
Thank you very much. My comments were designed largely for business people who may be newcomers or relative newcomers to this region. So please excuse me for saying the obvious, as I hope I will do. All this business relations began before the collapse of the USSR, when Richard Matsky, who was head of Chevron, went to Moscow, where he snooped around in the oil and gas, and they told him that the action is in Siberia. Forget anything else. And by the way, back in that era, we held a conference, the first oil and gas conference on Central Asia. We held it here in Washington at the Kennan Institute, and the Soviets sent a big delegation, and their mission, very plain and simple, was to tell us it's all over in the Caspian. You got to look to Western Siberia. And Matsky cut through that very cleverly and met a guy who was from Kazakhstan, who was a bureaucrat at the time, Nazarbayev, and they befriended him. And as a result, Matsky invited this bureaucrat to California, where the said bureaucrat swam in the Pacific Ocean, had one heck of a time, and they really got on. And the entire this was the opening act, and hats off to both of them, to President Nazarbayev, who was totally onto this issue before the collapse of the USSR, and to Richard Matsky, who really was the pioneer. Now, today, of course, action covers so much, my goodness. Not just oil and gas, critical minerals, of course, the big announcement at the C5+1 meetings on that, but way beyond it, to aircraft, to transportation, Kazakhstan's purchase of American locomotives and so forth, and now service areas and even AI. The whole field is open. And that's a big deal, and hats off for the C5+1, which is now finally, years too late, evolving into C6+1, and there are future expansions that should be discussed even now. Let me raise some obvious points about this. First of all, question of law. Well, you're dealing with in all the countries of Central Asia and the Caucasus, you're dealing with countries that had Soviet legal systems, which were basically heavy on Roman law, certainly not on British law. The only place where you can do business with the legal system with which we're more familiar is at the new financial center in Kazakhstan. Otherwise, everyone is dealing with their reworking of a Soviet legal heritage, some more extensive reworkings than others. But there are people who have been focused on the law of the states of Central Asia and the Caucasus, notably a Slovenian woman by the name of Musa Sever, very talented and very dedicated, who's had a really substantial and positive impact on legal thinking in Uzbekistan. But my point is, one shouldn't just assume comfort with on the legal front. There are as in every other field, young lawyers throughout the region who get it, who have been, many cases, educated partly abroad, and who are in a sense bicultural, but able as lawyers to deal not only with their reformed legal systems, which can have some very curious points that I won't get into, and with Western and the U.S. law. The same is true in the case of just normal business practice. How do you deal with corruption? It was a very, very obvious point anywhere in the world, including here. You've got to have a serious approach to that. Well, all one can say is be aware that this is a reality, and one way of dealing with it is by the way, generational, and that is go to younger people, many of whom have been educated partly abroad, and the talented young men and women of this region who have gone into business. And the Rumsfeld Foundation with our institute has for almost 2 decades now been seeking out these talented young men and women across the region. And we have a group of some 300 of them or more who are there, and these are the kind of people who one can put trust in. And it's extremely important in dealing with local issues, especially issues of corruption, that one attracts that kind of a person as staff. Now, on taxes, I don't have to raise that issue here in this room, but it is so complicated that our friend Dan Witt has been focused on this since day one. I've made several trips to Kazakhstan with him on these issues, and just rest assured that this is everywhere more complicated and potentially more risk involved than you may imagine from the outset. In all that, it raises the question of relationships, and that, if you will, of personnel. Partnerships work, but I go back to Mr. Matsky, who's alive and well in Connecticut, and hats off to him. Go back to him. He formed, before he had the business deal that led to the opening of Kazakh gas and oil, he formed a personal relationship with future President Nazarbayev. If you don't do that, don't even think of going there. This is why, because trust is built. Everything ultimately, yes, there are laws, yes, there are reforms, yes, there are all sorts of positive things, but on the other hand, there are pitfalls on every side. The best way to identify them and to deal with them is to have partners on the other side with whom you have a personal relationship and whom you truly trust and have reason to trust. I think that's very important. And something in that context that's worth emphasizing, and that is localism. Yes, tend to go to the capitals and you cut the deals there, you invite them here, you have a nice dinner and so on. Forget it. Every one of those deals you make ultimately has a rooting in some real place. And those real places in every country have their very specific relationships, politics, and so forth. And if you are ignorant of the real places that you're involved with, you'll fail. Because rest assured, your counterparts across the region, they are fixated on their rooted place, on their localities, and have to be responsive to realities at that level. And they may, in responding to those realities, make claims on you, the foreign investor, that may seem absolutely absurd or maybe totally wrong-headed, but they are real. And unless you have made contact with the local realities, most local realities, not the capital. If you haven't done that, you're doomed to fail. Well, let me say in general, three concluding points. First of all, acknowledge the differences. Yes, it's very important, but you may want to think from the beginning the possibility of extending any deal you're making to other countries in the region. The markets are relatively small on a global scale, and shame on the U.S. for being so slow to embrace the region. My goodness, the C5+1 was, would go back to the Silk Road Act at the beginning of the century, but C5+1 is now 10 years old, and it's getting started. Something's happening, but it took a long time, and we're still not really focused on a regional basis. We have an office now that we're told that they have to meet once a month. Fine, why not once every 2 weeks or once every week? But the region doesn't have a strong existence. Here in Washington, you have all these business councils for every country, but until recently they've been isolated from each other, except when there's overlapped management. But this is absurd. There should be a Central Asia-Caucasus Business Council, or a Greater Central Asia, better term, Business Council, which they should link arms. How they do it, that's their business. But until they do so, there are going to be impediments. They don't have the structures on their side within Central Asia and the Caucasus to coordinate and cooperate that they need. They're the only world region without such structures. They're working hard now or at least they're talking about working hard to get such structures. I think they'll get there, but they haven't before now, largely because of fear of pressure from Moscow, which destroyed, if you haven't read Sanat Kushkumbayev's paper that we published recently at the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute, you should. This paper, remarkable paper, is the first history of the Central Asia Union of the 1990s, which was so big a success that Putin wanted to join as an observer and then as a member, and then actively closed it down and started the Eurasian Economic Union, destroyed it. And because of that, the Central Asians have been slow to organize on a regional basis. They're starting to do so now. We need to do the same. And at the business level, there shouldn't be 8 separate business councils. Yes, in some respects they should continue, but there should also be a greater Central Asia Business Council where you are encouraged and facilitated in the process of moving beyond a deal with just one country. Now, finally, let me just say the obvious, that American investors in Central Asia, the Caucasus, Mongolia, eventually Afghanistan, you're in a highly competitive situation. Don't have any illusions about that. All the enthusiasms of the past week, which are warranted, and hats off to everyone who made it possible with the C5+1. But these enthusiasms actually get you to the front door. They don't get you inside. And others have gone inside. China is, except in, I think in Kyrgyzstan, the only place where it is not the largest foreign investor today. They're all over the place and expanding, and you are competing. Acknowledge it or not, you are directly competing with China. Russia much less so, especially in the last 3 years, but at some point in the future, post-Putin, which is dawning, you'll be competing with Russian business there as well. Indian business will be all over the place, I predict, within the next few years. And so the competitive prospects for any American or Western investor in Central Asia and Caucasus are formidable. And better now to start thinking about it. Don't be naive, in other words, and think that you have such a wonderful relationship that nothing could daunt it, nothing could erode it, but it could go overnight if your competitors have figured out what you're doing and propose how they might do it better. So in other words, let's be absolutely stone sober, let's be optimistic, be proactive, but again, to end, you've got to really understand the turf you're working with and the people you're working with. And if you fail at that, you fail in the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Starr. Next up, I'd like to welcome Ms. Dion. Please feel free to introduce yourself a little bit more.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take my phone for a timer. Thank you, and look forward to our discussion today. So my name is Cecile Myong. I'm based in Washington, but I cover the European Union, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. So I cover 12 countries across the continent. I'm going to give you a perspective, which is going to be the perspective of us as the World Bank. We're not only a financier, we also are economists. And so we've done some recent work with some evidence and some data about the state of investments in the region. And I think this is something that could be interesting for policymakers as well as for the private sector. So let me start by saying that Central Asia is really a region that has a lot of opportunities moving forward. So in some of the countries that I cover, such as the Europe side, the Europe is dealing with out-migrations, like there's really some skills that are missing, that are flowing to other jurisdictions. Central Asia is the second fastest growing region in the world after sub-Saharan Africa. So there's going to be 1 million people who are going to be entering the labor force every year in our Central Asian countries, which, is a serious challenge for the governments of those countries, but also a great opportunity. Now, that said, we see some common obstacles around the C5 countries when it comes to investments and when it comes to competitiveness. And I'm going to name 5, and we're going to go a little bit more into this later. So one is, there is still a large state presence in those countries. And so with the sort of dominance of the state-owned enterprises, we see some market distortions which somehow curtail the possibilities and opportunities for the private sector to come in. Second, limited transformation at this point. So the structural transformation that you would typically see in the countries moving from agriculture to industry and services, we still see 40% or so of employment which is in agriculture and transportation. And also, and that can be a challenge, but also an opportunity, a female labor force participation is still quite low. So it's 40% vis-a-vis 70% for men. Third, difficult enabling environment. So still business environment could be better. Fourth, high trade costs. And fifth, levels of innovation could be more fostered. So there are some issues. And I would say that, working in those 5 countries, governments are very aware of this. And they have put kind of, as a central part of their strategies, growth and fixing some of these issues. So for those of you who are looking to invest in Central Asia, I would say that we see a renewed reform momentum in a number of the countries of Central Asia. Now, I'm going to focus, we have actually a report on productivity, which is in fact going to be launched on Monday. And that report is called Tides of Change. It's on the whole of Europe and Central Asia. And why tides? It's focusing on 5 pillars of boosting productivity, which eventually will boost growth and investments. And it's T for trade, I for investment, D for digital, E for efficiency, or how financing should be flowing to those who are more productive, and S for skills. So for this discussion, I'm going to focus on the T and the I, trade and investment. So when you look a little bit about the trade and investment patterns in Central Asia, what we see is that trade has not really picked up in Central Asia. And when you look at the volumes of trade, you also see that, in fact, a lot of the foreign direct investment that is coming into Central Asia is actually reinvestments, which actually means that Central Asia has not been attracting so much new investors, which is something that is notable. It's not only Central Asia. We see this across Europe and Central Asia. But that's something definitely to pay attention on when you're a policymaker. So there has been a post-pandemic sort of export rebound, but trade as a share of GDP has stagnated in the past 10 years in Central Asia. That's one notable fact. Another fact, and I think you were discussing this a little bit, is that there's a concentration of FDI, both in terms of the sectors that are actually sectors where you see FDI flowing, but also in terms of the partners. So sectors, we look at very much still commodity experts dominating the region. And there's potential for much more, but still commodity experts are with primary products. And really, if you look at the trade flows, you realize that it's actually the commodity sort of boom that has actually influenced the higher investments. And then in terms of export destinations, they're pretty concentrated. So we mentioned, China, Russia, the EU. There is definitely not much diversification of investments, foreign investments, and that's definitely also an opportunity for Central Asian countries. So I think one can think about a mutually beneficial relationship if we start seeing a more diverse set of investors, and it would also bring to the Central Asian countries, more, diversification of their risks. Now, in this productivity report that we're launching on Monday, I'm going to give you a few sort of heads up on this, and I'll be happy if anybody's interested to share information about this launch. We actually see that among all of the Europe and Central Asian countries, the C5 countries have the highest missing trade in the whole of the region. Okay, so missing trade is, we calculate it. It shows the difference between the actual trade levels and the trade levels. And I'm not going to go into details, but that should be predicted. We use gravity trade models to see actually where the countries should be trading and what they trade for now. And we see missing trade across all countries, by the way, including in Poland. But it's particularly salient in Central Asia. And what does this mean? It actually means that there should be, and it's the same for both trade and for foreign direct investment. So if you look at the data, you see that there should actually be almost like $7.5 billion just coming in more every year if the missing trade was actually going to the level, was not down to zero, but was actually coming to the level of what you would see, let's say, in the EU, for example. So, and why is trade so important? Well, we looked a little bit more into the structure of the economies of the Central Asian countries, and we see that exporters are really the ones that are punching above their weight. So if you start looking into the microeconomics and the production function of the private sector in Central Asia, what you see is that exporters are very few, but they drive productivity, they drive employment, they drive capital, and they drive wages. Okay, so that's that. Now, I know I don't have a lot of time. I think I have 3 more minutes. I want to come back to what I said at the beginning, which is that we're also seeing that Central Asia is open for business. And, we see a number of reforms that are taking place, which makes us very optimistic that Central Asia in the future, with its strong dividend of skills and talent can actually attract more investments. So take the example of Uzbekistan, which in our assessment at the moment is actually the fastest reformer out of the 5 Central Asian countries. Some critical reforms are taking place. There's been an exchange rate. So if you start from 2017, which is really when Uzbekistan opened up, liberalization of the exchange rate, law on public-private partnerships, reforming of the banking law, new law on competition, investment law and privatization law, and they're in the midst of the WTO accession process. They're still reforming some of the core sectors, so telecom, energy, chemicals, agriculture, trying to bring more competition into sectors that have traditionally been dominated by state-owned enterprises. So I'll finish, and I have much more data, but I didn't want to overwhelm you with too much data. I'll finish by saying that our assessment is that with a few changes in terms of the policy setting and reforms, Central Asia should be able to attract a more diversified set of investors. And I hope some of them are in the room today. We expect that we will see a potential boom in the Central Asian countries if the governments are taking the right reforms. So I'll stop there. And thanks a lot. Happy to say more later.
Mr. Gilad has stepped out for a moment, so it'll be I who am introducing our next speaker, Mehdi Paryapi. You could please step the podium here. And as was said, he is the chair of the International Data Center Authority, a very new industry that is quite critical to Central Asia and its potential. So without further ado.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. I know some places here have been before. Central Asia is paramount in our research and in our work. We have ranked 187 nations around the world for their digital readiness, and we've shared our data with the United Nations, and we work very closely with them, helping, empowering those nations with their intrinsic propositions and resources. But we are a very programmatic and practical entity. We don't like to stay in the narratives and slogans. We like to actually do things. So I'll be a little bit disruptive here because I believe that Central Asia, as much as it has potential, it has a lot of speed bumps and hurdles. A lot of it comes to lack of transparency and proper decision-making processes that are well-defined, simply because you're dealing ultimately with family businesses. And that brings together a cohesive cloud of confusion for investors who want to invest. And for you to, break through and work, we've seen many times that, you need to have the right relationships. I personally met the president of Uzbekistan and prime minister of Kyrgyzstan, and we've met ministers left and right, we've hosted them here. And things don't end up in the trajectory or the direction that we hope for, simply because people don't find personal benefits in certain things. Therefore, it makes it more difficult for the American enterprise to do business. For the Chinese companies, it's much easier, and this is a reality. We have a competitive disadvantage because we cannot do certain things that other entities from other countries can do. But we are living in an era where computing capacities and HPC, high performance compute, can replace GDP compute, and the country's ability to produce data and run their data can define its future. And this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for countries to actually become seen on the radar of digital transformation and digital economies. This is the once in a lifetime opportunity. And AI could be the driver for this. And these countries, some of them are extremely rich with energy resources, including hydro. And if instead of thinking about selling off the critical minerals and other resources such as oil, if they became hubs, digital hubs, where they could actually render data and sell the new gold, which is data, then they could create an economy that actually can sustain itself. And we've seen many times countries who have been there, done that, such as Saudi Arabia, who were here this week. We see that the country who is one of the biggest exporters of oil has realized that they need to transition from that. They need to become a digital economy. They're spending all kinds of money just to get GPUs. So why isn't the CIS country doing that? Why are they not putting their will behind it? We've said many times, we've whispered many times, we've traveled many times to those countries and explained to them that if you really want to build an economy for your people, if you want to elevate the life, if you want to tap into the human capital and talent that you guys have, naturally, you need to stop thinking about digging the ground under you and beneath you and selling that, and instead trying to build an economy that can sustain itself. And this is digital economy. It's going to be minimum 30% of world GDP in no time. And these countries, unfortunately, with all the potential resources that they possess, they're falling behind the rest. But they could be a potential and consequential competition to the Middle East. They have cooler temperatures, and I can tell you from somebody who comes from this background, they are a much better place than the Middle East for data centers, for AI. Because you pay less for cooling, because they have high mountains, they have extremely good resources in water, they have access to renewable energy, and they have extremely talented and hungry human capital, which does not exist in the Middle East. So if you go to UAE, if you go to Saudi, if you go to Qatar, Kuwait, these countries, they import human capital from India, from other places. CIS doesn't need that. CIS is sitting on riches and on treasures which is not tapped into properly. And I believe that if they don't do something about it quickly enough, they're just going to miss the boat. So this is my frank opinion. And I believe in the potential of CIS. I'm originally Persian, so I have some cultural links to that region anyways. So we believe in the future of CIS if the decision making and the policy making is in place. And one last point, and I'll make this very brief, is that investment follows predictability. Countries that do not create a transparent safe haven for investment and trajectory of growth and scalability of investment will not receive significant amount of investment. Therefore, creating the right strategies followed by the right policies, creating the right legal governance and portfolios of legal framework, and building the right infrastructure requires commitment from the very top in these countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Variapi. So we're going to take a quick 2-minute break here. As you might hear, there's a bit of buzzing around the speaker. We have somebody from the Press Club's AV team to do a quick check on that.
I was asked to talk about 3 things. The first one is the nexus between strategic engagement and business investment. Don't touch those brownies, those are mine. Agricultural business potential in Central Asia and the challenge of the water shortage, water management technology business opportunities. And the third point is Jackson-Vanik Amendment. So I'll try to get to all 3 of those before we run out of time. Regarding the nexus between strategic engagement and business investment, I want to go far away from Central Asia and take you to the Pacific Northwest of the United States, where I grew up, and where in the pre-Microsoft era there were 2 large corporations that dominated the economy. One was Weyerhaeuser Corporation, a large timber company, and the other was, of course, the Boeing Corporation. And you might ask, well, what do Weyerhaeuser and Boeing have to do with investment in Central Asia? Well, there was a lumberman about 120 years ago who made a pile of money as a logger and sawmill operator and timber salesman in Hoquiam, Washington, which is about 15 miles west of where I grew up. After making piles and piles of money, he decided that he was going to buy one of these newfangled contraptions that allowed people to fly. The Wright brothers had invented it in 1903, so around 1911, he bought an airplane. And to his surprise, when he inspected this airplane, he discovered that it was made out of the same kind of wood that he had growing on some of his timber tracts, spruce. And he asked himself a question: why shouldn't I go into the business of building airplanes? This thing's pretty simple. It's just a motor on a frame of wood, wire, and fabric, and I can build airplanes. And so he started to build airplanes. His name was William Boeing. You may have heard of him and of his company. Boeing Airplane Company, if you've seen the press releases that came out last week after the C5+1, how many tens of billions of dollars Central Asian countries are buying of Boeing aircraft, both 787 Dreamliners and the 737s. And you ask, well, how did they get there? How did Bill Boeing get from being a timber operator, a logger, sawmill operator in Hoquiam, Washington, to selling his company now, selling billions and billions and billions of dollars of aircraft around the world? And a lot of it had to do with strategic investment. He hired some engineers, they were civil engineers, to design the aircraft. And after a little while went by, they discovered that civil engineering really wasn't very good at designing airplanes. You'd build an airplane, you'd design it, it would go up and it would crash. Or it wasn't stable, or the engine wasn't powerful enough. So he went to the University of Washington in Seattle and he said, I want to buy you a wind tunnel, which was what you use to test designs. You blow wind past it with some smoke and you can see how the air flows around an airframe and you can make it more efficient. University accepted it, and that wind tunnel was first installed at the University of Washington in 1917 during World War I. Over the years, Boeing Airplane Company has invested $100 million in endowments for the College of Aeronautics at the University of Washington. This is what we call a strategic engagement. This was a strategic engagement with an institution of higher education to create a cadre able to produce aeronautical engineers who would then become the employees of the Boeing Airplane Company and help design aircraft. So, Central Asia, look at what Chevron has done in Kazakhstan. Investment in human capital, investment in physical infrastructure in the oil and gas sector, development of petrochemical production in Kazakhstan, not just pumping oil and shipping it out of the country or refining it into gasoline and kerosene and diesel, but actually doing petrochemicals, including plastics. Uzbekistan, look at what's going on there with support for STEM instruction in schools and universities, vocational education for skilled trades, because it's not enough to have engineers, you need pipe fitters, you need welders, and they have to do world-class work if you're going to have a world-class product. Clean water projects and school renovations. Why? Because you need an educated workforce to do this kind of work, and they understand that. The other aspect of this, I'm going to touch on something that Professor Starr mentioned about the need for engagement with the communities. It's one thing to have an educated workforce. It's another thing to have community support for your foreign investment. There are two reasons for this. You go to the post-Soviet space, there are still a lot of people who are very suspicious of capitalists. They consider capitalists to be bloodsuckers. And sometimes they're right. Not always. So if you want to get the population on board so that the population is not sabotaging you, is not stealing from you, is not undermining your work, you need to do some corporate social responsibility. And this is extremely important in that part of the world. And I will point out, since the abolition of the U.S. Agency for International Development, there's a huge vacuum that China is beginning to fill. So if we Americans want to be competitive, and again, coming back to something the other speakers have talked about how we're in competition with other countries in the region, we need to fill that gap, and it's going to have to be filled by the private sector because the U.S. government is not there anymore. I was asked to talk about agricultural business potential in Central Asia and the challenge of the water shortage and some of the business opportunities. Climatically, as I think most of you know, if not everybody, Central Asia ranges from semi-arid to arid. Agriculture is a major part of both employment and the economies, and so how do you reconcile those two facts? How do you promote agriculture in semi-arid and arid climates? The two main crops are wheat and cotton, with wheat and other cereal grains in Kazakhstan mostly rain-fed, but cotton is totally irrigated. throughout the region, and most irrigation is through obsolete flood irrigation. And you all know there are three types of irrigation, right? You have flood, you have sprinklers, like what you put on your lawn, and then you have drip irrigation, which has an emitter next to every little plant. Flood is the most wasteful, it's the most archaic. It was first invented about 8,000 years ago. You just flood fields and then hope for the best. Whereas sprinklers, you can control the amount of water put down, and then with drip irrigation, you can do it with utmost precision. Now, water availability is going to be the issue of the 21st century. The Asian Development Bank predicts reduction of glacier melt starting around 2050 of 35 to 50% in Central Asia, reducing availability even as temperatures rise, which will increase demand for water. The chronic water deficit by 2028, 2 years from now, will be between 5 and 12 cubic kilometers, depending on what source you refer to. And after 2050, which is only 25 years away, it will only increase. And here's the kicker. As I said, Central Asia is a semi-arid to arid environment and faces water deficits, but it is top of the chart globally for per capita water consumption. Individually, more water is expended per capita in Central Asia and all 5 republics than anywhere else in the world. And I'll give you some numbers. Agriculture is by far the largest consumer of water in Central Asia, ranging from about 2/3 of total water consumption in Kazakhstan to 94% in Kyrgyzstan. Across the region, over 90% of water pumped is used for agricultural irrigation. Irrigation is important to agriculture. For example, if you look at Turkmenistan, 100% of crop area in Turkmenistan is irrigated. There's no rain-fed. Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan are in the 80 percentile, and 40% of Kazakhstan's crop area is irrigated. And Kazakhstan, again, is a bit of an outlier because of the large area under rain-fed wheat. So what are the solutions? Here's where business comes in. 36 to 40% of canal water is lost to seepage because the canals are not lined. It just seeps into the sand. Upgrading canals is an obvious solution, and this is an opportunity for companies with expertise in that realm, that type of construction. This can be combined with technologies to reduce evaporation from canals, which is probably another 5 to 10%. Expansion of sprinkler and drip irrigation is another obvious solution. At present, Uzbekistan irrigates 4.3 million hectares, but it only uses water-saving technology on 224,000 hectares, or about 5%. So there's 95% of irrigated area in Uzbekistan that could be upgraded. 40% of Kazakhstan's crop area is irrigated, and Valmont is already selling center pivot irrigation systems, but more would be better and would lead to greater efficiency. Right now, water conserving technologies are being used on 581,000 hectares of Kazakhstan's irrigated area, and that's only 3%. Now, tree fruit production in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, as well as cotton production in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, would benefit from low-cost drip systems, which have come on the market in the last 15 years. The market for irrigation equipment in Central Asia is estimated at $200 million per year, including sprinkler irrigation for field crops and drip irrigation for cotton, grapes, tree fruits, and shade house production of vegetables. Now, beyond irrigation, much of the water management system is legacy equipment that goes back to the Soviet time. It's well past its useful lifespan. This includes pipelines, pumping stations, dredges, and filtration systems. I want to talk about diversification of agriculture to less water-consumptive crops. Irrigation for cotton monoculture, as you all know, destroyed their Aral Sea. Cotton continues to consume inordinate amounts of water when compared to its economic value. A research study by the Caspian Policy Center, where Dr. Rudenschild works, showed that the amount of water needed to produce $100 worth of cotton is 12 times higher than for lemons or apricots, and 24 times higher than for tomatoes. And if you love Uzbek kuraga, dried apricots as much as I do, you will advocate for a shift out of cotton and into tree fruits. This is going to require investment in infrastructure to support that shift, ranging from the inputs to the marketing infrastructure to take those products off, shifting from cotton to fruits and vegetables, and that is a potential business opportunity as water availability shrinks. They'll have to do something. They'll have to do it. We might as well go in there and help them. I want to talk finally about the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. One of my first teachers of Russian was a Soviet Jewish emigre who managed to exit the USSR by virtue of the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. It was passed in 1974 by the US Congress to induce the Soviet Union to allow Jews to emigrate. My teacher was allowed to emigrate in 1975, the following year, to escape the USSR's rampant ethnic discrimination against Jews. A few years later, I spent a year working for Jewish Family Service of Seattle, helping Soviet Jewish emigres resettle in the United States, and even later in the 1980s, as an officer at the US Embassy in Moscow, I met with refuseniks who, for one reason or another, had been denied permission to leave the Soviet Union, among them many Jews. I tell you all this so that you understand that I am 100% sympathetic to the plight of people facing ethnic discrimination and who are barred from leaving a country that institutionally discriminates against them. With that said, it's time to repeal the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. It served its purpose, but it's been overtaken by events. And it's now a source of friction between the United States and the 5 Central Asian countries that freely allow Jews to emigrate. When I served in Turkmenistan 10 years ago, the Israeli ambassador estimated that there were only about 200 Jews left in Turkmenistan. All others had emigrated, he said, either to Israel or to New York City. Overall, there are no more than 5,700 Jews left in Central Asia. Any who want to leave have already gone. So it's time for Jackson-Vanik to go and for permanent normal trade relations to be instated for Central Asia. Thank you.
All right, now to close us out here before Q&A, we have Eric Rudschuld.
I'm going to break with tradition here and see if I can get this to work.
I guess we got a question.
There. Can you hear me? We're working. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, it's a pleasure to speak today on the new geopolitical realities that are shaping opportunities across the Central Asia region and beyond. And over the past 3 years, in particular, we've watched Central Asia move from diplomatic success to diplomatic success, producing one international breakthrough after another. But the events of the last 2 weeks represent something far more consequential, in my opinion. It is a strategic inflection point, not just for the region, but for the United States as well. Just days ago, Washington welcomed the presidents of the Central Asian republics to the White House for a landmark C5+1 summit, which for years Central Asian diplomats have been advocating for, arguing for, and patiently waiting for, and this time they succeeded. And the significance goes beyond symbolism. The summit was held at a moment of deepening U.S.-China strategic competition and a time when sanctions on Russia continue to reshape Eurasian connectivity. Central Asian governments understand the stakes very well. Central Asian governments understand that diversifying away from their dependence on their overlarge neighbors is no longer merely desirable, it is essential. For Washington, the summit was not simply a diplomatic courtesy. It was a demonstration of renewed economic statecraft. The United States has been explicit, securing access to critical minerals, diversifying supply chains beyond China, and strengthening energy and transport links across Eurasia are no longer optional. They are vital national interests. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau made this clear when he opened the C5+1 Business Forum by stating with characteristic bluntness that the purpose of foreign policy is to increase American prosperity through mutually beneficial commercial engagement. And that philosophy shaped the summit. Yet what followed in Tashkent may be equally important for understanding how Central Asia will navigate the next decade. No sooner had the leaders left Washington that they reconvened in Uzbekistan, this time welcoming Azerbaijan as a formal member of what is now evolving into a C6 format. And in doing so, they moved from ceremony to substance. They codified the reality of westward connectivity that already runs through the port of Baku, through the South Caucasus, across the middle corridor to Europe. And they laid down markers to solidify a long-term trans-regional architecture built around sovereignty, partnership, and self-determined cooperation. These two summits, Washington and Tashkent, taken together, illuminate a region that is no longer content to be defined by outsiders. In an era where Russia can no longer command exclusive loyalty and where China's economic footprint increasingly generates its own anxieties, Central Asia is choosing agency. It is choosing diversification. And it is choosing strategic engagement with the United States as part of a broader, balanced foreign policy portfolio. So, looking at the economic dimension, the opportunities are substantial. American companies, as you've heard already, are stepping forward. We have Wabtec delivering locomotives, Boeing securing aircraft deals, Chevron is expanding its energy partnerships. You have U.S. Financial enterprises helping integrate Central Asian economies into global capital markets. The U.S. government is simultaneously advancing initiatives that expand access to transportation corridors, critical minerals, energy production. But opportunity is not an automatic guarantee. If the United States truly intends to compete, it must build on this momentum and expand it. And that begins with linking the two American initiatives now shaping the region's future, the C5+1 framework and the emerging TRIP corridor through the South Caucasus. These are not separate tracks. Together, they can create a unified, resilient, westbound economic bridge that strengthens connectivity from Central Asia to the Mediterranean. The C6 format in Tashkent makes this alignment not only logical, but increasingly essential. Washington must also provide clearer leadership for American business. The next phase will require identifying priority investment lanes, critical minerals, processing, logistics, digital infrastructure, aviation maintenance hubs, renewable energy partnerships, and then identifying clear pathways for long-term U.S. commitment. And that means expanding co-funding opportunities, deploying XM and XM Bank and DFC tools with far greater precision, and offering guarantees for U.S. businesses that will reduce political and commercial risk for U.S. companies considering entry into the region's networks and markets. The low-hanging fruit is already mentioned. Repealing the Cold War era Jackson-Vanik Amendment remains probably one of the most single impactful steps that can be taken to enable permanent normal trade relations, which will unlock capabilities for Central Asia and U.S. business. It will anchor the United States more firmly into the commercial landscape of Central Asia itself. The Washington Summit also revealed something deeper. While the C5+1 is a valuable framework for fostering regional dialogue, its 2025 iteration leaned heavily on bilateral engagements. Each Central Asian president left Washington with distinct memoranda and sector-specific deals. And this dual structure, regional in design and bilateral in execution, in many ways mirrors the approaches that Moscow and Beijing have used successfully in the region. And the irony for us is that this very bilateralism has helped the Central Asian leaders feel heard, respected, and seen in ways that previous U.S. administrations sometimes struggled to achieve. What the Tashkent Summit demonstrated, however, is that Central Asia's leaders ultimately desire a more integrated architecture. one that includes Azerbaijan, one that strengthens westward connectivity, and it enhances their leverage with all of their external partners, including the United States. The C6 initiative aligns naturally with Washington's interest in fostering peace and connectivity through the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity, the TRIP corridor, opening the door for expanded rail, energy, and digital links that could more than double regional freight capacity to Europe. The implication's clear. Opportunities are no longer confined to any single country. They span an emerging, interconnected Trans-Caspian region. Economists project, we heard a little bit before, that this broader Trans-Caspian region will grow by roughly 5% in 2025 and in the years beyond. If sustained, it could become one of the world's most dynamic emerging markets in the days ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a test for both sides. For Washington's America First commercial diplomacy, success will be measured not by the size of a signing ceremony, but by visible progress. Critical minerals secured, refineries opened, aircraft delivered, grids modernized, supply chains operating independent of Moscow and Beijing. For Central Asia, success will mean diversification without substituting one dependency for another. Sovereignty reinforced not just by new partners, but by new institutions, such as the C6, that embody a regional voice. So where do we stand? What do these summits tell us? They tell us that Central Asia's future will not be decided in Moscow, Beijing, or Washington, but will be decided in Astana, Bishkek, Dushanbe, Ashgabat, Tashkent, and now Baku. They tell us that for the first time in decades, the region is building the foundations of its own geopolitical marketplace. And they tell us that the United States has a meaningful role to play as investor, partner, technological provider, and a reliable long-term stakeholder, but only if we seize the moment. Central Asia is becoming a key player in international trade, a region rich in critical minerals, as we've heard, strategic routes, and emerging industries. Russia and China will continue to be neighbors and will continue to compete intensely for influence. But the United States cannot afford to cede this field, not when partnerships here shape global supply chains, future energy and AI systems, and the national security interests of the next generation. In closing, let us remember this. The past weeks were not an end point. They're the beginning of a new era of opportunity. The choices we make now, public and private, diplomatic and commercial, will determine whether the next decade becomes the decade of the Trans-Caspian. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rubenschuld. We are going to be moving here to the Q&A portion of the evening. My intern here, Wilhem, is going to actually pick up the second mic to float around for any of you who have questions. Pretty standard Q&A format. Raise your hand, we'll call on you, and please state your name and any institution you're associated with, if any, and ask your question directed at any speaker who is currently on the panel. So with that, anybody? Okay. Sebastian Pavers. This guy.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? All right. Sebastian Pavers, I'm the director of Central Asia branch of Washington University. I have a question on cybersecurity, which is a concern in the region. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, part of the cybersecurity, Central Asian cybersecurity relies partly on Chinese and Russian systems. So I was wondering if one of you could say a few words on how Central Asian governments actually address cybersecurity and data protection, which will be essential if governments of the regions want to build, investor confidence in the region. Thank you.
Well, that's a fun question. I think, Central Asia is dependent for internet access, for telecoms access through Russia and China. they've controlled access. The nose is not just under the tent, the camel's all the way in the yurt at this point. And that has been problematic for the region. And if you look at the number of cyber attacks that the region is dealing with, it's impressive. Because what you're seeing is China and Russia are not only going after this region, we're seeing all sorts of cyber attacks on the region. They're also the suppliers of the equipment, and there's the suppliers of the access. So it is a huge challenge. That said, we are seeing advances now and new deals being made. One in particular recently where we're seeing telecommunications coming to the region through satellites directly in ways that, frankly, are not being controlled by these other capitals. And that provides a measure of digital sovereignty. And we're seeing a new digital access line coming across, it's coming across the Black Sea, it's coming across the Caucasus, and moving across the Caspian at this point, which will be yet another opportunity for this region to secure its digital sovereignty. But your point is extremely well made. Until those independent access ways are created, the region is somewhat circumscribed in its abilities to be truly independent.
How many times has the word region been pronounced here? Hundreds, just in this brief session. You might treat it as a region, but institutionally we don't yet. We've taken the first step toward this with the C. Now, we haven't yet fully embraced the C6 formula. They have, but we haven't. But from their side, there really isn't a region to respond to these proposals and suggestions. We're talking as if it does, that using the word somehow magically makes it real. It doesn't. This is entirely to the present moment. All talk of region within the region is aspirational. Yes, there are some meetings. There is some coordination. Yes, women's groups have met. Think tanks have met. There have been a few such meetings. Yes, presidents, before the last year, they met maybe annually or every other year. But now they're in touch. But is there any kind of coordinating body to deal with what you've just raised as a key issue? No. And rather than push yet another set of centrifugal relationships, the relationship with the United States from their perspective is centrifugal because they are dealing with us. What is lacking is centripetal force within the region. That's why it seems to me international financial institutions, especially the World Bank, should take the lead in creating what they need to institutionally in order to respond to exactly the point you raised and exactly the points that our two speakers have raised so well over here. This is, I think, this must happen or everything will remain aspirational.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. My name is Abdul. I'm a former diplomat of Afghanistan. I have a question from Dr. Isfaq. Dr. Isfaq, thank you very much for your amazing and outstanding book of The Lost Enlightenment. In your book of some 680 to 700 pages, you never separated Afghanistan from Central Asia. You talked about Balkh, about Bukhara, about Marwa, about Baghlan, Badakhshan, and in all over the book, Afghanistan and Central Asia are one region. Do you think that now, if Afghanistan crisis stays as it is, and it locks the potentials of Central Asia. Do you think without solving Afghanistan's issue, we can have a developed, prosperous, and functioning Central Asia? Thanks, sir.
It is absolutely inevitable, unavoidable, that Afghanistan will be part of Central Asia, institutionally and in all the ways we've been discussing today. What is actually happening is so far in advance of what's being reported here or anywhere. It's really quite astonishing. I mean, there's trade across the border, very large. I mean, to the west, look what's going on. Railroads being built, roads being built, and all these are international projects. I mean, the Turkmen were the laughingstock of the policy-making world for talking about their Tapi pipeline for 30 years, and nothing happened. Now something's happening. And financing is coming in order, not necessarily from the West, in some cases from the Middle East, but much more is going on. Railroads are being built. The Uzbek to Pakistan route that will take you to Peshawar via Kabul is the financing for that is coming together very fast. It'll be constructed. They're even talking now about the route that will go through Kandahar, and that wasn't being discussed during the American period there. My point is this: there's a lot more going on, and the people leading it most responsibly are their neighbors in Central Asia. It seems to me, and I've written this long paper that we published on U.S. strategy for Afghanistan, it seems to me we have a real opportunity not to dive in and get involved in a messy and unknown something in Kabul, but rather to work closely with our friends in Central Asia who are really they're experts, and we could work with them and to test in various areas what is really possible, what is really happening, what isn't happening. What should happen? This could all be done by the United States with and through our friends in Central Asia, and it would benefit everyone. It's not against anyone, and then it's not assuming that everything's going to be fine in Afghanistan. But to the extent there are positive steps there to which we could respond, or if we want to create initiatives, it's that these are best developed with and through our friends in Central Asia.
Good afternoon. My name is Rustem. I'm from Kazanform. Excuse me. My name is Rustem. I am from Kazanform. This event is very interesting and important, and I thanks for opportunity to ask direct questions. First, I'm interested of two questions. The first is logistic. We see how is changing the situation in the area of middle corridor. And I mean that Trump wrote for international peace and prosperity. My question, I want to know your opinion about what bottlenecks will receive Western or American investments in the middle corridor. Is the first question, and the second, I want to know your opinion about the Kazakhstan's oil refining sector. Could you tell how to attract American investments, advanced technologies in this oil refining sector, and your opinion about advantages and disadvantages, maybe obstacles for developing this sector in Kazakhstan? Thank you.
Quick logistical note, this is sort of a 2-for-1 question here, so we will answer this question and then get on to the last one after it.
Well, I can tell you what we see. You know, we do these enterprise surveys from time to time. So we go and survey the private sectors in the countries that we work in. And so we did that in Kazakhstan and in Uzbekistan. I was looking at this, and I have the data by foreign or domestic firms. What are the biggest obstacles that the private sector is facing? So that's interesting. So I'll tell you that there are differences between domestic and international firms in some places. So for international firms, if you take Kazakhstan, the biggest hurdles for the international firms, and we don't differentiate here between US or others, that are reported are on an adequately educated workforce. So that's an obstacle. Business licensing and permits is an issue, more so than for local firms. Practices of competition is something that's also coming more strongly from the international firms. Customs and trade regulations, probably because they all trade if they are there, and access to land. So that's in Kazakhstan. These are coming out more strongly from the international firms versus domestic firms. If I look at Uzbekistan, just to compare, similar, even stronger finding on the adequately educated workforce. So that's something that comes very strong as a bigger obstacle for foreign-owned firms. And then you've got corruption, which actually is more than, actually it's triple, 3 times as much an issue for international firms as reported as for local firms. Also an issue with the courts, which international firms seem to be having more of a problem with. So these would be some examples. I think we were just speaking with Professor Starr about trade integration and the fact that there's definitely room for more trade integration. So when we start looking at that aspect, we also find that issues of logistics come into play, costs of intra-regional transport and number of procedures are things that seem to still be bottlenecks.
I'll just footstop a number of those points. I think you're talking not just about Central Asia, you're talking also about the Caucasus, the South Caucasus, and connectivity between those two is problematic for most international organizations because, like the US government, like the EU, there is a division that goes down the middle of the Caspian Sea, and Central Asia is handled by one division and group of peoples, and the Caucasus a different one. And sadly, bureaucratically, they don't work with each other very well. They have separate budgets and separate agendas and objectives and programs that they work on. And it's much the same for the Central Asians themselves. If you look at the great work that the OTS has been doing in working on digitalization and customs harmonization, really some tremendously needed advances taking place, but their membership doesn't include Tajikistan. It doesn't include Armenia. It doesn't include Georgia. Trying to be able to get the kinds of wins for coordination between these countries across the Caspian Sea is probably the biggest bottleneck, one of the biggest challenges. Many of the things that international organizations work on, that bilateral programs work on, it's sort of the simple math that can get worked out. You put funding in, you do some education, you work on creating sort of a common language. Those are the kinds of things that can be done, but doing the broader work that actually brings all of the countries together and have agreement that we are all going to work together to pursue this corridor and to make sure that freight can move along this kind of corridor, that's a heavy diplomatic lift, which I think still is something of a bottleneck.
All right, final question here, Wilhem, at this table.
Hi, I'm Steve Powell. I'm the managing director of Sino Powell Capital and also of the Eurasia Fund, which we started recently to invest in Central Asia. I just got back from a long trip to Kazakhstan. I was in Georgia, Bulgaria, and Turkey. And many of the projects we look at end up being too small. They haven't reached scale. We just cannot invest in them like you can in the United States, where the projects are big. Even China, projects are big. Projects in our country or in China are usually subsidized in one way or the other by the government. These small countries in Central Asia can't do that. You just said, sir, that the countries should somehow figure out a way to combine. I guess my question is, it's one thing to get them to combine diplomatically and politically, but how can you get it done with business? I'm one of the few businessmen here, I think. How can you get these countries to cooperate business-wise so they can produce things at scale and make it more interesting for investors like us? Thank you.
It's happening.
I didn't get the memo.
You didn't get the memo because the people writing it are all half your age, half my age. And who are they? It's the young business people themselves. They know each other. They travel more than was done 20 years ago. I'm back to our Central Asia-Caucasus Institute's wonderful Rumsfeld Fellowship Program. How many people are there? 319. Pardon? 319 young men, no longer young. They're now heading corporations. They are in senior positions. The key guy in finance for dealing with the United States, the minister, is a Rumsfeld former fellow. I mean, and this is true all over. They know each other. They work with each other. They visit each other. They drink with each other. They convene each other with each other in the conferences, which are open, and you all ought to attend. It's going to be in Baku this spring. They are doing it, but they have the same frustration that we all do, namely, neither their governments nor our government nor international financial institutions are solidly behind it. So all this talk of the region, I repeat, is simply hollow talk until they themselves have their own structures and institutions. They are creating them de facto, but it's being done. Okay, yes, I know the presidents are meeting, the foreign ministers, that's all good, but there are no structures in the, have the formal chambers of commerce of the region met together? No. It's so obvious. You know, again, we don't have to have them meet with us. We could do what we can do to get their chambers of commerce to sit down with each other and do it on a regular basis. In other words, all our initiatives from the outside, and they're wonderful ones, starting with what the Japanese did in 2001 when they began the whole initiative of a grouping of Central Asians plus an outside power. They're all wonderful, and I'm not against any of them, including what the Chinese have done, the Russians, the Turks are doing, so EU. However, none of that substitutes for what's missing. And let's be honest, we can get very enthusiastic about all this golden potential in Central Asia and the Caucasus, but these are relatively small countries. And I mean, your point is extremely important. They are relatively small. If you, as an investor, are faced with that possibility, versus look at however many alternative major regions there are where you can operate on a regional basis, there's no choice. And it's impolite to point this out, but this is God's truth. And what we can do, what the international financial institutions can do, is standing quietly on the outside, facilitate their getting together without us.
Okay, how to walk the talk. So I'm going to give you an example of something we're doing right now. recognizing the issues of size. You can also add risk, on markets that may not be so known for the international investors. So the World Bank Group, because we are the World Bank Group, so that's the World Bank that works with governments, the International Financial Corporation, the IFC, and we also have MIGA that actually offers guarantees against political risk. We got together and thought, how do you crack that nut of the fact that markets are too small, so investors are not coming, and how do you crack it in a way that's actually like politically palatable, because there's also politics involved. What could be a bipartisan way of moving the needle and reducing what I would call as an economist some of these market failures that are there in Central Asia. And we came up with a new program, which we actually called FinGrow, which is Finance for Jobs and Growth. So as the World Bank Group, as the World Bank, we work directly with governments, and when we provide financing, it's not us being the implementers. We are financiers of the sovereigns, and it's the sovereigns that are in the driver's seat. So this program, FinGrow, which in fact is going for approval to our board on December 18, will be covering a number of countries in the region. And what we're trying to do with it is that we're using the financial sector channel to actually boost investments and growth, and eventually turn into jobs and financial access for businesses and people. It has 3 pillars. The first pillar is about digital payments. So thinking about cross-border, sometimes it makes sense to have start with the political side for regional cooperation, and sometimes you've got this anchor, right? And typically the anchor is going to be a cross-border infrastructure piece that everybody wants, or digital payments. Cross-border payments is another one. That's the first pillar. The second is about somehow promoting and enabling more credit going into the economies. And the third is about boosting equity. Equity markets are extremely small. You're looking at very small capital markets, right? So on the equity side, for example, we will be financing, and I'm going to take the example of Uzbekistan, but this is open to all Central Asian countries and has some regional elements to that. So we will be financing the government, for the government to set up a fund of funds. So you've got these equity funds that are tiny, and they're really tiny, I think in 2023 there were 16, I repeat, 16 equity investments in Uzbekistan, which is, almost none. So the government will be actually setting up a fund of funds. So it will be capitalizing a fund of funds, which will then take minority participation into equity deals, crowding in the private sector to fuel the economy, to actually be able to finance these entrepreneurs, who have plenty of ideas that they can show for. And that fund of funds will actually be open, those funds will invest in Uzbekistan, but they could also invest in other places. And by the way, this may not only be in Central Asia, it could be in the Caucasus, I was in Azerbaijan 2 weeks ago, same, very small markets, and in fact they're already trying to have further ties with Kazakhstan, for example, right? So that's one way to actually promote. This is kind of a role for governments. They should then let the private sector drive the commercial decisions. It's not for governments to decide. But if there are issues like that, which are issues of size, issues of risk, there is really a case for governments to step in. So this is one way to do it. Now, there are also policy and regulatory issues that still need to be fixed in the region. So, for example, there are still, in a number of the Central Asian countries, restrictions for equity funds to invest if they're actually foreign owned. So the government is looking at how to actually do reforms that are actually also going to allow more private sector to come in. So it has to be a combo. So the government has a role to play on the reform side, policy and regulatory, same for cross-border payments, that's necessary. And then some early stage investments that can then crowd in the private sector. And we're doing this with the IFC and MIGA, because even for us, the idea is to actually bring to scale financial intermediation in a way that eventually the private sector takes forward, once the market failure is gone. And that would be the one of size. So that's an example of how we concretely help deal with the issue of small markets and relatively young markets. So there's more risk to investing still in Central Asia than in some other more established jurisdictions.
Thank you. I did not get that memo either.
Huh?
I did not get that memo either, but it's a great idea. We should talk further about it afterwards.
Yes, we should.
That'll be it for our Q&A session. We are finishing up here. We'll have the room until about 3, so feel free to network and everything. But just to close out the panel here, I would like to thank, first of all, our wonderful panelists, Cecile Yang, Professor Starr, Eric Grunschuld, Alan Mustard, and Wesley Alexander Hill and Mehdi Parayaf, even though they are here to finish out the panel with us. I'd also like to finish everybody who put in amazing work at the EGS program at ITIC. So Dr. Ariel Cohen, who is actually in Astana right now, so he is unable to join us today. Wesley Alexander Hill again. And our media intern, Wilhem Hausmann, who has done so much logistical work for this event and has made it really able to work out for today. And of course, all of you in our audience I'd like to thank as well, especially because I'd like to, as a representative of ITIC, of course, hawk our next events. We have a couple more upcoming, like one on December 9th, focused on great power competition in the region. And we will soon be releasing promotional materials for that, and we hope that you sign up and join us there. Otherwise, thank you very much, and like I said, feel free to network for the next few minutes here.